All right, folks. Welcome to the Kelt Show. Today, we will probably finish Metatron's Celts rebuttal that we have been doing. I need to make sure that this microphone, it seems to be working fine. And let's continue. We had left off at this 9:52 mark. I think he's going to go into the Celts being the Hallstatt quote-unquote culture. And so I'm going to listen forward on my end here. You're not going to see me playing this, and you're not going to listen. You're not going to be able to hear it. .952. Okay, so then let me continue from 9:52 from here, and let me see what is the next point that he makes, and then we'll address it. I want to test something here. If I can make this louder, perhaps. So I'm going to be testing this now. And now I'm going to make another test. 1, 2, 3, testing. Louder sound. 1, 2, 3, testing. Louder sound. One, two, three, testing. Louder sound. All right, let's go with that. I think this is good. Let me go ahead and continue listening to Metatron here. Let's see what the point that he makes is that he titles The Roots. So he's saying that he's going to try and get to the root of Celtic identity, or when trying to do it, then he's going to explain what happens, what we have to consider. So he's going to present two competing models, he says. So there's one that he calls the traditional model, which gives the Celts a Central European origin, he says, specifically in the Hallstatt core, and then he shows that one of those tired Hallstatt maps. I'm going to show you the one that he's showing at 10 or 4-ish. This is the tired map that he's showing, and this map is part of a model, as he's saying. He numbers 2 models, but of course there are more, but he's saying that these are the top ones. I'm not sure which 2 they are, but definitely this is one of the top models for sure. And I believe that even calling it traditional could be fair, although it's like a second order traditional, because the true traditional way of seeing the Celts was in southern Gaul. And that's, again, because of the passages of Strabo and Siculus that we have seen before. And But here he's arguing, especially with this map, that the Celts are original to the area, the yellowest of all here on this map. So that makes them some sort of an Eastern Alpine people. Now, we're going to look at some paper in a little bit that will clarify what the situation is today with regards to the academic opinion on this model. But we're going to let Metatron at least present the two so that we can tell what is it that he's comparing. And then we'll address these features specifically. So then he argues that according to this model, the Proto-Celts arise during the Urnfield culture. And I'm going to show here for the purposes of documenting, and I believe their article does mention the Celts. Not sure if it's going to mention that this model is no longer current. Some linguists and archaeologists have associated this culture with the pre-Celtic language or Proto-Celtic language family. And it's interesting because it didn't touch the exact areas that were the most Celtic, I suppose, at least from the map. It's saying that peoples from there did migrate west, I suppose, but still. Yeah, it's much more likely that the Celts were the Atlantic Bronze Age system peoples, at least in terms of being in the same place, right? But still, this is a model that, here we go. Place name evidence has also been used to point to an association of the Urnfield materials with the Proto-Celtic language group, and it has been argued that it was the ancestral culture of the Celts. The Urnfield layers of the Hallstatt culture, Hallstatt A and Hallstatt B, are succeeded by the Iron Age Hallstatt period proper, Hallstatt C and Hallstatt D, associated with the early Celts. Hallstatt D is in turn succeeded by the Latin culture, the archaeological culture associated with the continental Celts of antiquity. Now, let me see, because he goes into the Galaseca culture, which is interesting because this is part of what made this obsolete. So let me see what it says about the Galaseca culture here. The Galaseca culture in northern Italy developed with continuity from the Canagranite culture. Canagranite represented a completely new cultural dynamic to the area expressed in pottery and bronze work, making it a typical Western example of the Urnfield culture, in particular the Rhine, Switzerland, Eastern France, or Urnfield culture. The Lepontic Celts, which is another, well, it's the same as this, but it's some other part of what brought this hypothesis to an end in academia. The Lepontic Celtic language inscriptions of the area showed the language of the Galaseca culture was clearly Celtic, making it probable that the 13th century BC language, or at least the RSEF area of the Western Urnfields, was also Celtic or a precursor to it. Okay, so then it says that the appearance of some elite status markers could explain what exactly? The spread of Celtic languages in this area from the prestigious Proto-Celtic early Urnfield metal workers. So that would have been quite recent if this had happened. How did they date this? I wonder to what period this is dated. Let me just see if it says here. Well, sure. All right. I guess it's like a presentation page for a book. Or this series of papers. Yeah, this is the short way of saying that Hallstatt is not equal to Proto-Celtic. The earliest Hallstatt Iron Age cannot equal Proto-Celtic. I have been looking for a clear explanation of this for a while, so let me go ahead and grab this for my own reference later. All right. All right, so then let's continue here with his video. Again, I'm not going to play it here live. You can listen on your own end. I'm going to listen on my end here. So then he considers in this model that the Latin after Hallstatt was then the fully fledged period where the fully fledged period of the Celtic expansion. So then he says that this matches well with the attested place names, the Celtic place names in antiquity. We'll see about that. And now he talks about, what did he say? Insular. Yeah, now he says that he's going to contrapose this with the insular model. So let me see what this model is. And then he says, pushed by Barry Cunliffe and John Coke, which proposes an early Celticization along the Atlantic facade. Well, it's not even a Celticization, but he's interpreting it that way. But let's continue. I'm not sure why this is called the insular. What did he call it? The insular model? Yeah, he calls it the insular model. I'm not sure why, but let's see. So this is an interesting point. Let's let him say this here.
Iberia, Africa, Britain, and Ireland, subsequently expanding through a Bronze Age maritime network. Both models have been recently criticized. Most of the criticism stemming from the fact that it is in fact difficult to define clearly who is a Celt.
That's why I'm here. That's exactly what I'm here for. It's to define clearly who is a Celt, and it's not difficult at all. Now, it is difficult if your job is going to end if you do it, right? So if you're an academic, and if the only way to do it honestly is such that your job ends because you're no longer going to be associated with anything called Celtic if you do, then it's going to be very difficult to convince these people to do it, because who's going to put themselves out of a job, or who would like to do that, rather, right? And so, but as we have seen, it's very easy to define clearly who is a Celt. It's these guys we've already seen, right? So I'm not going to repeat it. So it could be that the problem between deciding among these two models, it could be that the problem is that it's difficult to define who's a Celt, but also there is a difficulty outside of that, of course, in deciding which one is true, regardless of who call themselves Celts, who is a Celt, regardless. I suppose there is another question here, and so maybe I'm not sure that I agree with this framing. I would say let me try and say it very clearly. What's making it hard to decide among these two models? What's making it hard to decide among these two models is not the difficulty in clearly defining who is a Celt. It's the difficulty in deciding whether Proto-Celtic and Proto-Germanic, but mainly Proto-Celtic, spread with the Bell Beakers or with these Iron Age, Hallstatt, and Latin peoples. And I put it that way because then of course there's the subsequent, more specialized and why there's that difficulty, and so it depends on what arguments you consider strongest, and I suppose if you have a bias towards accepting linguistics arguments, you will prefer the Iron Age the Iron Age model of spread of the Celtic language with the Hallstatt peoples and the Latin peoples, whereas if you give more weight to archaeological evidence, you will probably prefer the Atlantic facade model. Nowadays, the Atlantic facade model is gaining more and more followers, and I've said this before. One of the reasons is it's hard to explain Lusitanian with the Hallstatt model, because it requires that there were a spread of Proto-Indo-European in the Bronze Age. But there are other reasons, and we might get to them. So let me continue with this to see where he's going to go with this idea, or if he just changes it. So he's saying there's a difficulty in defining clearly who is a Celt, both spatially and in regards to time. Well, for the Celts, there's before and after Anna Comnena, and then before and after Celtomania. So there would be two pivotal points that change more or less, or end up trying to change it. Of course, you can't change it, but that end up trying to change what a Celt means. But the classical original meaning was these people in Western Iberia, as we have seen. So now he's going to talk about a third approach that he says makes matters even more complicated when it comes to the context of who is a real Celt or not, he says. And he says that it's so-called a non-essentialistic approach. So he says that that approach simply tries to reject classifiers. So he says that he's not going to go into the details with regards to the essentialistic and non-essentialistic debate because they're rooted in politics. Well, one side is rooted in politics, the non-essentialistic debate, right? The other side is not. The other side is simply rooted in evidence, information, history, truth, if you'd like to call it that. So I wouldn't say that that's true. One side has this sort of clear evidence that I can show here. If I ended up putting it here again. Yeah, this. One side Metatron has all this evidence of people calling themselves Celts. This is the essentialistic side. This is not rooted in politics. So I would like it for you to retract that statement, because you're simply equating both sides, but you're lowering the genuine side to the level of the political side. The non-essentialistic is the political side, of course. It's in the name, right? It's non-essentialistic, right? So it's going to be meta. It's going to be after the essence. And so they're going to go to politics, arts, they're going to go to culture, language, and so on, right? But the essentialistic is not political. The essentialistic is about these stones that have been carved with the names of the Celts, and that today they're mostly in Western Iberia. So why are you calling this political? I do take issue with this. Why do you call this political? I don't understand why this is political. These people are obviously the Celts. They're calling themselves Celts here, right? Why would we say that this is political? I'm not sure. You say that they are, but you don't say why. And I'm on 11:35 of this video now, Metatron. All right. Right over here, 11:34, 11:35. Let's continue. So he says he might tackle these details on a separate video. We're still pending that video. Okay, so then he clarifies that the Hallstatt, instead of being just one group of people, would be more accurately classified as a comprehensive cultural system. A comprehensive cultural system. How is it comprehensive? I'm not sure what he means here, and I'm not sure if it's a cultural system, but let me see what he's going to say. But the point is that they cannot be said to be just one people. We cannot automatically say everywhere where we find Hallstatt, they are the same people, hence the Celts. Just like we cannot say today everywhere where we find the iPhone, there are Americans. So he makes the point that the Western Hallstatt peoples most likely did speak Celtic, but the Eastern ones ended up becoming Illyrians. So then he makes the point of the Galaseca culture and the Castro culture in northern Italy and the northwestern part of Iberia, respectively. He says that they are detached from the Hallstatt Central European culture. Nevertheless, they present Celtic characteristics. So you see here that the whole gambit, as far as I understand, with this Celtoskeptic idea that I suppose I am one of the now communicators of, is that calling these things Celtic characteristics already makes it confusing, right? Why are we trying to inject this name of a tribe and trying to look for characteristics to be theirs, as if this were an independent effort. There's nothing in these characteristics that say it's Celtic. Again, the name came from these Celts of Spain who called themselves Celtic, these Celts of Iberia. And so we shouldn't really, since we know now that they are a tribe, that they were using these names endonymically, we shouldn't be looking for characteristics to call Celtic. This is going to make less and less sense as time goes on now that these Celto-skeptic scholars are in the helm. Let me continue to see what the point is. He's about to finish this Celtic identity point. He admits that all of this might be confusing. He says that in the 5th century BC, the Latin culture developed from the western branch of the Hallstatt culture. So he really thinks that the Proto-Celtic is from this 500 BC-ish era. At least he's saying that this is part of the model. I'm not sure that he's saying that he believes it, but it's part of the model. Okay, so he's talking about abandoning kings in favor of an aristocratic warrior class. None of that matters for identifying who the Celts are. Okay, so he finishes the point about the Celtic identity at 1306, and then now he's going to go into the language. So the point that he made about Hallstatt, I need to address that now before he goes into the Celtic language. Let me open up the document that will help me address this. This might be it. By it, I mean a direct link to the PDF. So it wasn't. Well, this is like one of those ways that they publish the paper that they don't put it on a PDF. They put it on the website, but I kind of we could use this, but it's just that it's I kind of have a memory of having read the paper, and I can better situate myself, if that makes sense. Yeah, let's view it. I think I can kind of remember what it was. It has the bullet points that I want to find. And again, folks, in this channel we go straight to the point. You can read this paper if you like. The name of the paper is An Alternative to Celtic from the East and Celtic from the West. I do recommend very much that you read it. It is, I say it's pivotal in Celtic studies, but of course it's the fact that it's doing a review of what happened. So it's not that this paper became pivotal, but it's narrating what happened that was pivotal in changing how Celtic is seen in current Celtic studies. So we're going to read the abstract just so that we can locate ourselves, but then we're going to quickly jump to the point that I want to make with this paper. Now, by the way, before I read this, I want to say that he's going to propose a sort of a Celtic from the center. For those who have been outside of the entire conversation, this is almost a way to say we need to go back to square zero, right? Is that how the expression is? You have to square one. We have to go back to square one. That's what it means, sort of, to say that Celtic might have come from Southern Gaul, which is what he's going to propose, because that's what people believed to begin with before all of these studies. All right. So just so you're in the loop here, and you don't think, oh wow, he's proposing that it's from the center. It might be a new model. What is it? What is it that he collected in terms of evidence to make him think that it came from the center? Nothing. He's just undoing the Celtic from the east and Celtic from the west, trying to undo both. Well, more precisely, he's going to narrate how it did happen that the Celtic from the east ended up not being considered the valid one anymore. And then he's going to also say, which it doesn't matter for us, how he thinks that the Celtic from the west is not valid according to his criteria. But the point is that then he tries to undo those two in order to go back to square one, which is that everybody thought that it came from Southern Gaul. All right, so let me go ahead and read this abstract here, and then we'll go to the point that we want to make with this paper. This article discusses a problem in integrating archaeology and philology. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists associated the spread of the Celtic languages with the supposed westward spread of the Eastern Hallstatt culture in the first millennium BC. So interestingly, I'm making a pause here, but Metatron, you seem to be even more recent than these guys, right? Because you were saying that probably up to, or rather down to, the Western Hallstatt culture becoming the Latin culture. Did you think that they could have at least continued in spreading, or as you defined, it was the apex of their spreading the Celtic culture and languages westward? But that is so recent that that's not even what this guy is attacking, because I suppose it's not as mainstream, or it wasn't as mainstream as thinking that this started happening at least in 1000 BC. I'm sure though that Metatron, you would still agree that in this model, this range, I suppose, could be the one that they're proposing. So let's generously allow for this Hallstatt model, proposing that anywhere from 1000 BC to 500 BC do they think that the Celtic package spread. So to continue here, more recently, some have discarded Celtic from the east in favor of Celtic from the west, according to which Celtic was a much older lingua franca, which evolved from a hypothetical Neolithic Proto-Indo-European language in the Atlantic zone, and then spread eastwards in the 3rd millennium BC. So that's a very specific Celtic from the west that he's attacking. If he thinks that this is some sort of a fixed theory that is not going to adapt these small details that he mentioned here as it goes on, then I suppose that his attack is proper, because some of these are not even any longer defended. I mean, a Neolithic Proto-European language, I'm not sure that this is exactly, well, but regardless, this is part of the point why we're not going to spend time talking about what he thinks of Celtic from the West. If he's not interested in trying to further actually find out when and where did these languages come from, and he's going to default with Southern Gaul non-theory theory, then that's up for him to do. But what we're interested in is his proper takedown of the Celtic from the East, which we will talk about in a second as soon as I'm done reading this, if I can get through with it, if I can stop interrupting myself. So he says, this article does 3 things. Number 1, it criticizes the assumptions and misinterpretations of classical texts. Look at this. I'm going to read this again. This is beautiful. because it's one of these things that it's seldom done, which is an academic saying, we have made mistakes. This article criticizes the assumptions and misinterpretations of classical texts and onomastics that led to Celtic from the East in the first place. Number 2, it notes the unreliability of the linguistic evidence for Celtic from the West. And this is interesting, right? Because, of course, it's not going to agree with linguistics, since linguistics has an opinion itself about when these things happened. So, of course, from their point of view, from the point of view of the linguists, it's going to be unreliable linguistic evidence, what the Celtic from the West people are relying on. So this is like partially dishonest, because it should come out and say, you know, they use different ways of calculating this. For instance, he goes on to explain this glottochronology, namely glottochronology, which assumes that languages change at a steady rate. Again, this is some sort of a attempt at taking down the idea by saying, oh, they're missing some key point that is so obvious. They are assuming that languages change at a steady rate. Well, you know, and the Newtonian formulas assumed that a lot of things happened that actually aren't the reality, right? That there wasn't air friction and so on. Of course, we have to average some things out sometimes and enhance and hone the tools as time goes on. And so to criticize something that is starting because it has some problem, again, is to think that it's never going to change. But let's let Patrick Sims Williams do that. Second point of the number 2, misunderstood place names distribution maps, and the undeciphered inscriptions in southwest Iberia. So these are the things that he thinks that Celtic from the West incorrectly relies on, which again, we don't need to defend any of these things to defend some sort of a Celtic from the West idea, which again is not his idea of this Neolithic Proto-Indo-European language. I'm not aware of any. I thought that they were all in the Bronze Age. But and number 3, proposes that Celtic radiating from France during the first millennium BC would be a more economical explanation of the known facts. Well, indeed, they're going to be more economical because you're going to put less evidence for it than the other two have ever offered. Now, again, we're not here to understand what is his new theory, because it's quite myopic, not important for us. We're going to go and check out why is it that Celtic from the East was discarded. I'm looking for a place here, ladies and gentlemen, where I remember reading these 3 points that he makes. Maybe he says the word 3 somewhere. This is already talking about the other part, the Atlantic theory. It's this. No, it's not. Actually, before we get there, let's talk about this, because this is good. The whole paper is very good. Let me read this part here. Thus, there have been 3 main stages of scholarship. Number 1, the Celts are identified with the Hallstatt and Latin cultures of the first millennium BC. Number 2, then the discovery of contemporary Celtic language inscriptions, Lipontic and Celtiberian, in the quote-unquote wrong areas cast doubt on whether the ethno-linguistic Celts can be identified archaeologically. And then 3, most recently, however, they are associated with the archaeological cultures of the Atlantic zone of circa 3000 BC or even earlier. Again, I'm not sure who's defending this. In this paper, I argue that both the new Atlantic model and the older Central European one, though alluringly exotic, are unsupported by any solid evidence and are inherently implausible. I shall conclude by suggesting a realistic, if less romantic scenario, Celtic from the center. So, right here, Metatron, I'm going to present to you that, according to Patrick Sims Williams and his arguments, and he cites many other scholars, and he's currently, at least up to the time that I have been aware of, the president of the International Congress for Celtic Studies. So he's the main guy in Celtic Studies, or has been. Again, I'm not sure. Didn't check at this second. He says that in this paper he argues that, and I'm going to skip this Atlantic model because I don't care. But in this paper he argues that the older Central European model, the one that you just presented, Metatron, although alluringly exotic, are unsupported by any solid evidence and are inherently implausible. So in your video, you have presented at least 2 models that are unsupported by any solid evidence and inherently implausible. But I'm not going to attack the one from the West, because most of its critics are uninterested and unaware of uninterested in learning and unaware of what it's actually trying to accomplish. It's something we'll go into later. Doesn't matter for now. I also want to make a quick point here, since he's making it. This book is so good, but it's not book, this paper. People like to say that the Celts never called themselves Celts. Sometimes they say that there wasn't a people who considered themselves Celts. I'm going to show this only in a later stream, not today. But since he talks about it here, I'm just going to mention Celtiberia, for instance, shared hardly any material features with the Latin culture, even though its population spoke and wrote a Celtic language and identified themselves as Celts, the Latin poet Martial being an example. So Martial, 3 times in his poetry, calls himself the descendant of Celts and Iberians. And this is something that very few people know. But again, we're not going to go into that in this stream. But it's important to understand that these people were aware of that identity. And by these people, I mean exactly Iberians. Nobody else was calling themselves Celts, although I think we do have another citation of someone in Central Gaul calling their own language Celtic. Again, it's not for this stream. I'm still looking for the place where he says that there are 3 things, but I suppose that I just memorized it that way. Because one is Nyrax, the other is what was it? The other was the Spirine. How is this point so far away from the other one? Deprived from Hecateus and Herodotus. So the Herodotus point is the Pyrenees point. What is the Hecateus point? How did I get the name wrong? Oh, Tyus, of course. Oh, the Hecatias is the Nyrax one. Ah, okay, okay. So then deprived, then that goes to the third point. Right. All right, now I remember. So the three things are the Pyrenees, not being a city but being the Pyrenees mountain range. Number two, Nyrax not being Norica, which is in Austria, but being in Sardinia. And number three, these place names being attested too late, where they thought that they were attested the oldest. And so we're going to go through these three arguments, Metatron, but basically those were the three main things that allowed that model to be thought of as valid. In other words, the three main pieces of evidence that one could use to defend the Hallstatt equal Celts model were that Nyrax was thought to refer to Norica in Austria rather than in Sardinia, that Pyrenees was thought to be Heuneberg in Germany rather than the Pyrenees Mountains, and that the name places in Central Europe were thought to be the oldest out of all, and they turned out to be the youngest and the most recent of all. So we're going to go through those, and let me see where it properly starts. Again, the paper is all good. I really recommend that people read it, but I want to read just the important parts for our point. Yeah, sure. Maybe we can mention this. Yeah, maybe we should start all the way up from here. Yeah, maybe. Or here. What is it that it says before? Difficulties start to become apparent. Yeah, this already makes the third point first, so I gotta start from earlier even. Oh my. Thought this was going to be a shorter stream, but it's gonna be longer. That's alright. Let me put my my orange glasses here. My blue light eliminating glasses. One moment. I actually don't know where they went. Let me go ahead and look for them. We'll be right back. And we're back. I found the glasses. Do you know where they were? Right in front of me. That's right. So, we read the abstract, but we're actually going to also start from the introduction. So this is direct from the what we just read, and then later on at post-production, I will pick out the best parts, the most important parts, and then put them together. That way it will be more efficient. So, introduction. Philology, which I believe is the study of words, is that what it is? Let's go ahead and look it up so that we both learn. Study of texts and their languages, especially ancient or classical languages. All right. Philology and archaeology have had a difficult relationship, as this article illustrates. Texts, including inscriptions and names, are the philologist's primary evidence, and when these can be localized and dated, they can be profitably studied alongside archaeological evidence for the same localities at the same periods. Such interdisciplinarity is harder in prehistoric periods, from which no written records survive. While philologists can infer a great deal about lost proto-languages by working backwards from their descendants, their tools for localizing them in space and time are inadequate. This explains the endless debates about the homelands, in quotes, and dates of Balto-Slavic, Indo-Iranian, Indo-European, and other postulated proto-languages, as in Mallory et al. In the 2019 work. Debates further complicated when simplistic assumptions are made about prehistoric populations, archaeological, linguistic, ethnic, and biological homogeneity. Confront with Sims-Williams in a 1998 work under B, and in a 2012 work under B. All too often, philologists have lent on outdated archaeological models, which in turn depend on outdated philological speculations, and vice versa. Such circularity is particularly evident in the study of Celtic ethnogenesis, a topic which can hardly be approached without understanding the checkered development of quote-unquote Celtic philology, and then quote-unquote Celtic archaeology and their respective terminologies. The term Celtic, in quotes, has been used in many conflicting senses. Chapman in a 1992 work, Collis 2003, Renfrew 1987, 2014. In this paper, Celtic, in quotes, refers both to the peoples whom Greek and Latin writers called variously Celts, Galatians, Gauls, and Celtiberians, and to their related languages, as known from inscriptions or inferred from place and personal names. Applying a single term both to a population and to a language should never be done lightly. But in the case of the Celts, they do seem, at least from the middle of the first millennium BC onwards, to constitute a valid ethno-linguistic group. For this term, see Mallory et al. 2019. No single material culture can be associated with them, and there is no prima facie or prima facie reason why we should expect one to do so. The relevant material cultures, in quotes, are so varied as to cast doubt on the coherence of Celtic archaeology and Celtic art, both terms in quotes. Old attempts at archaeological definition, such as the term Celt designates with certainty the Latin cultural complex from 400 BC on, now appear arbitrary. Celtic, in quotes, is rightly regarded as a misleading label for the Central European Hallstatt and Latin material cultures, in quotes, of the Late Bronze Age and Iron Age. See Renfrew 1987-40 and Sims Williams 1998a. The peoples of the first millennium BC who spoke the attested languages which meet the philological criteria for Celticity, certain unique divergences from reconstructed Proto-Indo-European, corresponded encouragingly well in their distribution to the historically attested Celts, Galatians, Celtiberians, and so on, while corresponding poorly to the archaeological Celts, in quotes, deduced from Hallstatt and Latin archaeology. So now I'm no longer reading, I'm commenting on it. He already makes the first point here, that it's something that should have been noted since the beginning. The distribution of Hallstatt and Latin is not the same as the distribution of the Celtic languages. And this is why then this movement westward, I suppose, has to be proposed. We're going to get to why that movement is an issue with the model instead of a benefit or a profit. But so far he's getting into this picture that there is not a 100% overlap or close to between the Celtic languages, territorially speaking, geographically speaking, and the Hallstatt and Latin territories. The overlap is rather poor. This difficulty, now I'm coming back to the reading here. This difficulty started to become apparent in the middle of the 20th century, as archaeologists began to accept that the oldest Celtic language inscriptions of the 6th and 2nd centuries BC respectively were to be found in the context of the Galla Secca culture around the North Italian lakes, the site of the Lepontic inscriptions, and in Celtiberia in northeastern Spain. So this is what I was saying when I was reading that Wikipedia article. These come as refutations of the Hallstatt equal Celtic model. They don't come to its aid. Continuing. These were not Hallstatt or Latin areas. By these, he means North Italian lakes and northeastern Spain. Celtiberia, for instance, shared hardly any material features with the Latin culture. Even though it's and there's a citation here, Beltran and Jordan, 2019, 244. So let me read again without this. These were not Hallstatt or Latin areas. Celtiberia, for instance, I keep saying for instance, but it's for instance. Celtiberia, for instance, shared hardly any material features with the Latin culture, even though its population spoke and wrote a Celtic language and identified themselves as Celts, the Latin poet Martial being an example. So because Martial is from the Celtiberian Peninsula, and so he also said in his poems about 3 times that he's a descendant of Celts and Iberians. And so that's why he's an example of someone identifying themselves as Celts, because he wrote in his poetry 3 times that he's a descendant of Celts and also Iberians. Now back to the text. Language became prominent in definitions of Celticity following the discovery of Lepontic and Celtiberian, coupled with the revival of archaeological interest in language and ethnogenesis inaugurated by Renfrew. To quote Beltran and Jordan, I suppose from that same work, the undoubted status of the Celtiberians of Hispania as Celtic, demonstrated by inscriptions such as the Botorita bronzes near Zaragoza, as well as their clear differences from the Latin Gauls, has helped to define the conception of Celt by emphasizing its essentially linguistic character. They continue. At the same time, new perspectives question even the supposed Central European origin of the Celtic language, suggesting a possible genesis along Europe's Atlantic facade, whence it would have spread towards Central Europe. Here they allude to the 20th first century hypothesis that situates what are called Celtic origins in quotes, the reference being Cunliffe and Koch, 2019, in the extreme west of Europe, a view now espoused by some who had previously favored Celtic ethnogenesis in Central Europe. For example, Cunliffe, see a work by 1992, under the reference 1992. A work from 1992. According to this new Celtic from the West hypothesis, the Celtic language was already current by 3000 BC throughout an Atlantic zone that embraced the British Isles, northwestern France, western Spain, and Portugal, and then spread eastwards into Middle Europe during the Beaker period by 2000 BC. The reference here, Cunliffe, in a 2018 work, under reference 395. A variation on Celtic from the West is Celtic out of Iberia, see Koch and Cunliffe, 2016, 3. By 5000 BC, an Italo-Celtic dialect of Neolithic Proto-Indo-European reached southwestern Iberia, where Celtic split off from Italic and spread as far as Scotland by 3000 BC. Thus, there have been three main stages of scholarship. 1. The Celts are identified with the Hallstatt and Latin cultures of the first millennium BC. 2. Then the discovery of contemporary Celtic language inscriptions, Lipontic and Celtiberian, in the quote-unquote wrong areas casts doubt on whether the ethno-linguistic Celts can be identified archaeologically. And 3. Most recently, however, they are associated with the archaeological cultures of the Atlantic zone of 3000 BC or even earlier. And then he goes on to say that in this paper, I argue that both the new Atlantic model and the older Central European one, though alluringly exotic, are unsupported by any solid evidence and are inherently implausible. I shall conclude by suggesting a realistic, if less romantic, scenario, Celtic from the center. So again, he gives an example, Metatron, of Beltran and Hordan being a part of this period, this second period, right after it was in vogue to identify the Celts with the Hallstatt and Latin cultures of the first millennium BC. He identifies Beltran and Hordan as being a part of this second part of this Celtic narrative that he's building, wherein the discovery of contemporary Celtic language inscriptions in the wrong areas, with regards to the first view, casts doubt on whether the ethno-linguistic Celts can be identified archaeologically. So it was also really through this work that more forcefully the Celts started or continued to be defined from very recently as defined essentially by a linguistic character from a 1987 work, because their cultural reality and their archaeological reality started to become shattered by the fact that these zones were not did not exhibit the Latin culture. For instance, Celtiberia, shared hardly any material features with the Latin culture. Even though it was Celtic speaking and its population identified themselves as Celts, for instance, the poet Martial. And then this allowed this new theory called the Celtic from the West to rise. Now, I caution here because, of course, one must define a target in order to attack it, right? And so I don't criticize Patrick Sims Williams for picking, Dr. Patrick Sims Williams for picking one definition and then undoing it or deconstructing it. But this has moved on to become something else much more sophisticated, and it addresses all these points. And so that's why we're not going to go into this detail on this stream. Let's continue here. Now we go into this section called Celtic from the East. And this is the main section that we want to get into Metatron, because he's going to explain why is it that Celtic from the East, which is his label for your Hausstadt equal Celts model. And again, it's just one of the models that you presented. I know that you presented both models, and this is not exactly your model, right? But it is one that is very popular and one that you presented. And I want to show why it's not any longer academically considered as convincing or valid. And this section is going to go into detail, and then we're going to explain. So let's start. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists associated the emergence of the Celts and the Celtic languages with the Central European Hausstadt culture, the late Bronze and early Iron Age type site in the Celts Kamergut that gave this culture, in quotes, its name, lies within what in the Roman period constituted the Celtic kingdom of Noricum in central and eastern Austria and northern Slovenia. The supposition that Hausstadt itself was a Celtic site, perhaps connected with the Celtic Tauriski tribe, was already current in the mid-19th century, although some preferred to regard it as Illyrian in origin. In the English-speaking world, Terence Powell's The Celts in 1958 was a classic presentation of the Hausstadt Celts, in quotes. Behind Powell lay Joseph Deschelet's Premier Âge du Fer ou Époque des Hausstadt in 1913, the textbook used by Powell's Cambridge teacher H.M. Chadwick, and behind Deschelet lay the speculations of Bertrand and Reynac's Les Celtes dans les vallées du Pô et du Danube, 1894, and Henri Darbois de Jubainville, principaux auteurs de l'Antiquité à consulter sur l'histoire des Celtes, 1902. On the basis of tendentious interpretations of passages in Hecataeus and Herodotus, all these scholars associated the original Celts not with Gaul, as might have been expected of Frenchmen, but with Noricum and the headwaters of the Danube in southern Germany, whence the Celts were supposed to have spread west to France and Italy. So, Metatron, you see here how the current president of the International Congress of Celtic Studies argues that this was an error. It was an error that it was done on the basis of tendentious interpretations. So the fact that one, as you presented in that video, one could interpret Herodotus as trying to imply that these Celts that he was locating in those passages that we have seen, that one could interpret that he meant a place in central Germany, is a tendentious interpretation. Because, of course, Herodotus admitted that he did not know the geography of Western Europe. Even in those passages that we saw, he admits that he is hypothesizing and he's talking about things that he has not seen. But he argues that on the basis of an argument from symmetry, the Nile, which again also he does not know of, in his thinking, the Nile would go south and west as the Danube went north and west through each of those rivers' respective continents, cutting across all of them and cutting them in half. And so he thought that the Danube would cut Europe in half, as we have seen before. I believe it might even be open here still. Here it is. That is what Herodotus was talking about. He was talking about the river's length. He was not talking about the Celts. He was using the Celts as one of 4 references. He talked about the Pillars of Hercules, which is in Iberia. He talked about the Pyrenees, which is in Iberia. He talked about the Kinetes, which is in Iberia. And then he also talked about the Celts, which therefore would be tendentious to interpret that he was putting the Celts in central Germany, since after all, he's giving all sorts of anchor references to put in the mind of the reader that he's talking about these westernmost places in Europe as, for his hypothesis, the source of the Danube to be. And so he puts the source of the Danube among these 4 reference points. So it would be dishonest to think that he's putting the Celts in central Germany, because he's clearly saying all along the passage that this is all about being the westernmost places in Europe, which is why he invokes these 4 references. He goes. Here he admits that he doesn't know, for instance. And as a conjecture, judging of what is not known by that which is evidence to the view, it starts at a distance from its mouth equal to that of the Ister. The Ister is the Danube River. It was the old name for the Danube River, one of them. For the river Ister begins from the Keltoi. So you see, since he's talking about rivers all along, now this river which ran by the city, blah blah blah, so this whole thing is about rivers. So then he goes ahead and invokes the Keltoi as the first reference to locate the river. For the river Ister begins from the Keltoi. So the Keltoi are just an object to him. They're just like a thing that people know are the westernmost thing of that category, in this case of people. Now he's going to then make sure to tell us that it's only except for the Keynesians, who are even more west, but otherwise they border on the Keynesians, these Keltoi. But of course, because the Keltoi are more famous than the Keynesians, he needs to mention the Keltoi first. But that is all to locate the river Ister. It's to locate its source, to locate where it begins. So let's read this part. For the river Ister, I'm going to actually read it as if he were saying Danube, because we all know that this is the river Danube. There's no doubt, academically or otherwise. For the river Danube begins from the Keltoi and the city of Pyrene, which again we're going to see Aristotle tells us that he read this passage from Herodotus, all right? So there's intertextuality that happened in real life that Aristotle then says, look, people of the future, Herodotus was just making a mistake here. It's not the city of Pyrene. It's clearly the Pyrenees mountain range. So I'm going to read as if he had said that. For the river Danube begins from the Keltoi and the Pyrenees mountain range, and so runs that it divides Europe in the midst. So you see again why it would be dishonest to put these two references in Central Europe, because then the river would stop in the middle of Europe and it wouldn't divide Europe in the midst. Where's the map again? So if it stopped in the middle here, it wouldn't divide Europe in the midst, right? It would be half divided and half not. That's not divided. That's still hanging. And then he goes on to make a note, a parenthetical. He goes, now the Keltoi are outside the Pillars of Hercules. So now he's making a reference to this other very Western thing, one of these westernmost things that people know of, the Pillars of Hercules, which are this black dot, black square here in the a little bit south of Spain, in the north of Africa, in northern Africa, I mean. And he says, now the Keltoi are outside the Pillars of Hercules. To say that they're outside in Greek speech, in Greek idiomatic speech, is to say that they are on the other side as opposed to on this side in reference to the speaker. So on this side in reference to the Greeks would be east of the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Strait of Gibraltar. And so outside is the west of them. And west of the Strait of Gibraltar, as we can see here on the southernmost point of this map, is where all these Celts are located. The people who actually call themselves Celts and not even Celtici. Those are actually the Celts, you see? They call themselves Celts. So then let's continue. Now the Keltoi are outside, so they're west of the Strait of Gibraltar, and they border upon the Kinesians. So now the other reference that he makes, the Kinesians, which cannot be located anywhere in Germany, nobody even tries. The Kinesians are the westernmost people, see, because they're in the southwestern Iberia. The southwestern region of Iberia is the westernmost point, at least in the mind of these ancients of Europe. And so that's why Herodotus is making he's taking great care to tell us that he's being precise about who actually are the westernmost peoples. He first talks about the Keltoi, but then he makes sure to tell us that it's the Kinesians who are the westernmost, because the Keltoi is simply the most famous westernmost people. But they border on the Kinesians, who dwell furthest towards the west, so the sunset, of all those who have their dwelling in Europe. So he's saying out of all Europeans, the Kinesians are the westernmost, and then are the Keltoi, who border on the Kinesians. So again, how could Herodotus be locating these Keltoi in central Germany if they're being said to border on the Kinesians, who are in southwestern Iberia. It would be dishonest to argue that. So again, as we have seen, the Celts are simply being used as an object, as a like a token that people know means westernmost parts of Europe, and specifically Iberia. And he's evoking these 4 reference points to make sure that we know that he means that, according to his theory, the beginning of the river Danube is in the westernmost parts of Europe. That's the point he's trying to make. That's why Patrick Sims Williams in that paper is making the point that it would be dishonest to argue that it actually requires a tendentious interpretation to put these Celts in Germany, because the whole passage is not even about the Celts. It's about the location of the beginning of the river Danube. All right? So let's continue with the paper. To some extent, Deschelet's synthesis of archaeological and written sources survived intact into the present century, both among archaeologists and among linguists, who continue to refer to the original Celtic homelands in the south of Germany and Austria. So you see that this then got out of control. Now you have even linguists referring to these homelands, to the Celtic homeland, as being in south of Germany. Again, because of these tendentious interpretations, linguists, perhaps they should know better, right, to read more critically texts, but nevertheless they really wanted this to be true for Celts to be in Central Europe, that they read these passages tendentiously. And instead of putting the Celts in Iberia, where they were being put by Herodotus in that passage, they instead saw that passage as justifying them being located in Germany and Austria. All right, so Metatron, as you can see, this is the beginning of this mistake. This he's going to connect to Hallstatt and Latin, if he hasn't already, as he has. But basically, this is when Hallstatt and Latin start to be considered Celtic. It's because of references like Herodotus being tendentiously read, the one that I just showed you specifically. All right, and so that whole thing was a mistake. And we shouldn't be repeating that mistake. We should be trying to bring people up to speed to the most up-to-date understanding of these topics, I suppose. So let me continue here in the next paragraph. 19th century scholarship had prepared the way for an eastern location. The philologists known as Keltisten and Keltomannen had claimed, falsely, that the Germanic languages could be explained on the basis of Irish and Welsh, and hence that German civilization was fundamentally Celtic. So we start this tendency that people have up to this day. I'm going to show on a later stream. We have a very good example very recently that it happened, and I want to cover. But basically, we start with this mania that everyone now wants to be a Celt, because I suppose the name sounds cool, maybe, and they want to be able to be called a Celt, and be able to be called Celtic. And so now even the Germanic languages have been explained as Celtic, and so therefore they're Celtic. And so because their language can be explained this way, hence German civilization. Can I go back? Yeah. Because Celtic can be explained this way, in this linguistic term, in this linguistic way, then now the whole of Germanic civilization they want to justify as being able to be explained that way, and as being Celtic. So now already we see the quick movement from language to civilization. This is very quick to happen in 19th century scholarship already. More respectably, Most philologists since the 1830s had come to accept that the Celtic languages descended from Proto-Indo-European and must therefore be in some sense Eastern, especially given prevalent assumptions about what Sir John Rhys termed the supposed westward course of civilization. But how far west had Proto-Indo-European traveled before it evolved into Celtic? This was and remains a problem, for the picture is complicated by awkward evidence for eastward Celtic movements in the historical period. Thus, the obviously Celtic ethnic place and personal names of Galatia in Turkey are clearly due to the Celts' documented eastward migrations of the 3rd century BC as reported by Greek writers. Other eastward migrations raise similar problems. The Volcae Tectosages were settled north of the Danube in the most fertile areas of Germany around the Hercynian forest, according to Julius Caesar. Their tribal name is linguistically Celtic, property seekers, as is the name of the Hercynian forest, oak forest, one of the earliest attested Celtic place names, already mentioned by Aristotle. But Caesar is adamant that the Volcae Tectosages had migrated eastwards across the Rhine from Gaul, and unfortunately we do not know which Celtic speakers first named the great Hercynian forest. As the forest was so vast, those who named it may have lived a long way from it. Another linguistically Celtic but problematic Eastern ethnonym is that of the Boii of Bohemia. No ancient author claims that the Boii were indigenous to Bohemia. Instead, Caesar and Tacitus relate that they crossed the Rhine eastwards into Noricum or Bohemia, while Strabo states that they migrated from northeast Italy to the regions around the Danube, where they dwelt with the Taurisci, a people he identifies as Celts, and as neighbors of the Norici, although according to Pliny, the Taurisci and the Norici were identical. Here again, the classical ethnography, confused though it is, fails to support Celts from the east. So he's basically saying that all of the classical writers that we have imply that the Celts migrated from west to east, not these east to west movements that would be required for the Hallstatt theory to explain its expansion westward of the Celtic package. The origin of the North Italian Celts presents similar problems, and any arrows on modern maps are speculative, as rightly noted by Cunliffe and Collis. So here he's giving reason to Cunliffe and Collis for arguing in the right side. No contemporary written evidence survives. Nevertheless, the tradition reported by Livy that the various contingents came from East Central France is quite credible, despite his confused chronology, and that's from Kirka 26 BC. Yet Bertrand and Reynac rejected Livy's account entirely, with the exception of one sentence, which describes how a contingent of Gauls, following an expedition to Marseille, traveled through the territory of the Taurini, around Turin, on their way to found Milan after crossing the Julian Alps. Bertrand and Reynac, like Darbois de Jubanville, insisted that the circuitous eastern route via the Julian Alps in Slovenia far from Turin was no mistake, and amended Taurini to Taurisci to fit, so that the Gauls would start out from their supposed archaeological eastern homeland in Tauriscan Noricum. Most editors of Livy regard the Julian Alps as a mistake to be amended, but some commentators still favor the northeastern route because archaeological evidence, ultimately just the opinion of Bertrand and Reynac, makes it more historically accurate. So as you can see, this implausible, and then he goes on to say, this is implausible, the argument is circular. So as you can see, Metatron, the point that he's making here is that they are changing the original text and changing Taurini to Tauriski so that they can then justify Gauls moving from where they want, from Noricum, in other words, from southern Germany and Austria, to justify this Hallstatt theory. So this theory has existed because of these falsified evidence, along with these tendentious interpretations that we saw earlier. So it's mired and constructed out of these lies. And unfortunately, this is why it's nowadays making your video inaccurate, because it's outdated. You're presenting these theories that people today fortunately recognize to be false, tendentious, and insisting on defending something for which there's no evidence. Again, if there were evidence, they wouldn't be needing to be amending these things. And the reason he says it's circuitous, the argument is circular. I mean circular, not circuitous here, but circular there. The reason he says that is because, of course, it's because they changed Taurini to Tauriski, and then by them being a cohort of Gauls that moved east to west, that now makes them Celtic. And so by changing the text, he can say, oh, this is a people that we have independently, through the texts, identified as Celts, because of course they are in this area that we called Celtic in this time of where we think they expanded around that time. However, as you can see, they're being placed in the east, the Gauls are, by changing Taurini to Tauriski. And then a reference to this theory that the Celts are from there, from a tendentious interpretation of Herodotus, allows them to wash away these fragile connections that they're making here, and allows them to defend this, such that even someone like you, who makes these well-researched videos and has an entire team of researchers behind you, end up repeating these lies because they're so well covered in these small details that we are lucky to have Dr. Sims Williams explain to us. So let me continue here. Perhaps because assumptions about the westward course of civilization were so ingrained, 19th and 20th century scholars underplayed the problem posed by the Celts' eastward migrations. The insistence of Bertrand and Reynac, Darbois de Judenville, and de Chelette that the Celts of Noricum and the upper Danube were indigenous, and that a Celtic Hallstatt culture spread from there westwards to France, is a good example. Their alleged written evidence for a Celtic homeland in Austria and southern Germany does not stand up. So the way that they misread Herodotus does not stand up. It came from only two writers, both from Asia Minor, Hecataeus and Herodotus. So here he's going to go into more detail finally. And he's going to show the 3 points on which this theory mainly rested. Here's point number 1, which I call the Hecataeus or the Nyrax point. The summary being that they thought they could associate this with Noricum, but actually it's associated with Sardinia. According to Stephanus of Byzantium, Hecataeus, in a work now lost, referred to a Celtic city called Nyrax. The 19th century speculation that Nyrax can be connected with the names of Noricum and or its city Norea was based only on a vague similarity, as already conceded by Darbois de Judenville and de Chelette themselves. So even these contemporary authors already conceded at that time that the reference was only vague similarity and could not be defended. Philologically, it was inferior to Mühlenhof's perplexing speculation about a connection between Nyrax and the Sardinian word nuragi, since attested as Nurak on a Roman inscription near Molaria in Sardinia. Stephanus's only other relevant citation again takes us well away from Austria. He cites Hecataeus as mentioning Massilia as a city in Liguria near Celticae. Unfortunately, near Celticae, meaning Gaul, may be a clarification added in transmission and need not go back to Hecataeus' time. Fortunately, however, better support for an early Celtic presence in the Marseille hinterland is provided by Celtic personal names on 5th and 4th century pottery from Lat and Enserun, and by Apollonius of Rhodes's allusion in the 3rd century BC to Celts and Ligurians along the river Rhone. Herodotus alone provided the French scholars with their evidence for 5th century BC Celts. So let me go back to better understand what he just said here. Basically, he's saying that before they thought that they could associate Nyrax with Noricum and Norea, which was happily in Austria, but instead it was much inferior to the speculation that it should be associated with Nuragi, which indeed today we attest very close to Nyrax. For instance, Greek would write this U with a Y because Greek doesn't have U, so this would get very close to Nyrax. And so then he talks about this Celtic point. I'm not sure if I understood. Stephanus' only other relevant citation again takes us well away from Austria. He cites Hecataeus as mentioning Massilia as a city in Liguria near Celticae. Unfortunately, near Celticae may be a clarification. Yeah, I'm not sure what this point means. Alright, let's go to this main point here about the... this is now the second point, which is the Herodotus or the Pyrenees point. And in summary, they read Herodotus tendentiously, as we saw in the passage that I read earlier, to try to interpret that Herodotus was trying to locate the Celts in Germany, where the actual source of the Danube is, when in fact Herodotus was making a geographical point about rivers, and when he talked about the river Danube, he was trying to locate it as west in Europe as possible, and so much so that he said that it cuts Europe in half, that he made 4 references to try and put the to put forward his hypothesis that the river started in the westernmost parts of Europe. He made these 4 references to very western things in Europe, and those references were the Celts, the Strait of Gibraltar, the Keynesians, and the Pyrenees Mountains, which he thought was a city called the Pyrenees, or Pyrene. So let's read what the article continues to say. Herodotus alone provided the French scholars with their evidence for 5th century BC Celts around the source of the Danube in Germany. So this was the only reason, Metatron, to believe that there were Celts in southern Germany during this time, and hence to believe that Hallstatt is the source of the Celts. You need to understand, I suppose, this is the only reason that they had. And as you can see, the passage does not justify defending that. So this is outdated because of this. This is where the rubber meets the road. It was only this holding up that Hallstatt has anything to do with Celts, and that it has to do with their origin. It was this passage that has been tendentiously interpreted. So let's continue reading. Evidence which supposedly proved the Celticity of the Eastern Hallstatt culture, and by extension the so-called Western Hallstatt culture which derived from it. So this gets into what you were speaking about. You talked about the Western Hallstatt culture, and here he's making a connection to the Western Hallstatt culture from the Eastern Hallstatt culture. Or so they believed, on inadequate archaeological grounds. For Bertrand and Reinach, the Celts of the Upper Danube were at the southern end of an imaginary Empire Celtique, Darbois de Judenville's phrase, which stretched north to Bohemia and Jutland, which is in Denmark. By contrast, their Celtiberians occupied an insignificant strip of land between the Rhone and the Pyrenees. So, I want to actually draw attention to what he's making, to the point that he's making here at Metatron, and I want you to look at this also, because he's making an excellent point here. This is when the whole association of Celts with Central Europe started to be made in such force, because they really wanted to be able to associate eventually the Northern Europeans with Celts. This is also why I was saying that it's so harmful to continue to use those passages that you used about the Celts being blonde with rippling muscles to characterize the Celts, because actually the association of the Celts with Northern Europeans was through these Central Europeans, and it's exactly what academics and others are now trying to undo, because it was unjustified. And here I'm going to show you how it continues to till today. This association much more strongly being made between the Celts and Central Europeans, and an insignificant strip of land being given to Celtiberians. In this case here, it was given in the wrong place, but I'm going to show you how it's given usually in a much smaller way than it's given to the Central Europeans. If I simply type Celts map and I go to Google Images, I'm going to be able to find that most, if not all, maps are going to give some sort of more weight. They're going to give more weight and importance to Central Europe and less to Iberia, for instance. Let me show you this one as an example. See, they go, oh. Well, simply by implication of the colors, you can see that what is being argued here is that the Central Hallstatt territory is the most Celtic, and then Gaul is more Celtic, and then, oh, Iberia is just a little bit Celtic, and the Britons, they're more Celtic than Iberia. You see the point that they're trying to make? And so here, you can see that in Western Europe, the Northwestern Europeans are more Celtic than the Iberians. You see how this all contributes to this falsehood basically being perpetrated. We continue to repeat this old idea that the Celts can be associated with these Central Europeans, which they end up also being able to be associated with them, but not because of Hallstatt, but because of something else that we're going to go into later. But then this allows for people to make this sort of map. This is just one example. Let me give you other examples here. This first map, of course, is another example. So always the center is given like the most important color, in this case yellow. I know that there's a better resolution for this, but it doesn't matter. And then like even Lusitania, which is where exactly the Celts are from. You know, we can see through a map like this, right? That's where the Celts are from, literally. But Lusitania is said to be less Celtic, and then this Central European territory is said to be more Celtic. Oh, and then of course we can't forget that the Celtic speakers today are said to be more Celtic than even the Celts. Again, another example. Has them starting in Central Europe and then migrating to Iberia only in 600 BC, but only in the center, only in Gaul and Germany was it the major Celtic cultural area, but otherwise in Iberia and here in the Britain Islands as well, in the British Islands, it was just a side thing for them. or this one. This is the map that you showed, and I believe you even framed it to cut away the Iberian part. I'll show you that later if I can. But look at this map. The strongest colors in the Hallstatt and Latin territories, and then just a little bit for the Iberians, and much more for Gaul. So Gaul is always more Celtic. This is a great example. I really like this example to make my point. Look at that. Iberia now, all the Western Iberians are gone, and only the Celt-Iberians were left with like a third of their territory. So this guy is being very ungenerous, right? He's like, oh, Gaul is like all Celtic, and then even the Pannonians are more Celtic than like these mere Iberians. They're like almost not Celtic at all. And all the Britannia and all of Ireland is Celtic, hurrah! But Iberia, not at all. Oh, they're just a little bit. Don't worry about them. We can forget about them and just talk about Gaul and Britain and Ireland as the real Celts. Yes, You see what this allows? This whole confusion with the Celts allows for this. Look at this. This map is incredible. This is a map of, it's called Map of Celtic and Germanic Tribes. Look at this. The guy completely forgot Iberia. There's no tribes in Iberia. He's only talking about, look, he didn't even forget the boy and even the Lugi in Poland, man. He put the Celtic tribes from Poland, but he completely neglected Iberia. He's like, we don't need to talk about Iberians. Iberian Celts, who cares? When literally, those guys are the Celts, man. He forgot to talk about the Celts. He put everybody else in Iberia, in Europe for him is a Celt, except the actual Celts. Except the actual people calling themselves Celts in their own objects. Those for him are not Celts. But everybody else and their mother, everybody else to him is a Celt. Look at this. And he made sure to not forget anybody, even the Caledonians, man. He remembered to put there. The Caledonians. We don't even know if they spoke Celtic. There's nothing from them, I don't think. So this is this guy's map of Celtic and Germanic tribes, I suppose. Yeah, Celtic and Germanic tribes. He forgot all the Celts. All the Celts are not here. And we can find more. There's like good maps too. Let me point out. There's good maps. But let me see which other maps illustrate my example. Make my point. Oh, look at this. I love this one. I hadn't seen it before, actually, but now I love it. Look at this. Proto-Celtic ancestry. The ones that are most Celtic here are the ones who are least. Like, these people are not Celts at all. The ones who are most here are not Celts at all. Never call themselves Celts. Although the Sequani would be co-ethnic with the Celts. Oh, but at least he did put Celtic here on the west. So this guy was at least a little bit honest. And he put... under Lusitanians, the people who call themselves Celts as Celtic. So why are all these people Celts? Because of Proto-Celtic. But again, Proto-Celtic is a language. It's not an ancestry. Right? Now, of course, what he probably means is bell beaker ancestry, which of course I know it's pots. Yes, beakers are pots. But we can talk about the bell beaker bearing people, or the bell beaker technology people, and then we shorten that for as bell beaker people, but nobody thinks that they're the pots. And so bell beaker ancestry is all over northwestern and southwestern Europe. While they were beakers, they were already two groups, an English-like group and a Spanish-like group, as we have seen in other streams. So all of these people are 100% beaker ancestry. They're equally all 100%. All of those peoples in green there. And also Ireland and Scotland. They're all 100% Belbeeker. And so I don't understand what it means, Proto-Celtic ancestry. Where did you get this from? I don't really know what it could be, but it perpetuates the stereotype that Iberians are always less Celtic, even though they use the name Celt and nobody else does, but they're always less Celtic. Let me look at another map here. Oh, this one, look at this. Map shows the early Celtic migrations. All right, let's look at the early Celtic migrations. This is one of those Facebook links, so it's going to show up with this blurry quality. But nevertheless, we can clearly see, look, in Gaul and in the Hallstatt area, oh, that's the real Celts, yes. And then always, British Islands, more Celtic than Iberia. Look at that. They make sure to always put it more Celtic. Look at this one. Makes exactly the same point. British Islands, always completely Celtic. Iberia, just a little bit Celtic here and there, just some patches, but we can totally ignore it. What else? Look at this. Celtic and Germanic peoples. Look at that. Germanic and Celtic peoples during antiquity. The Celtic peoples have completely been neglected here. There's no one from Iberia. Actually, the part where the Celts are is not even on the map. They cut it off because it would be Western Iberia, specifically west of the Strait of Gibraltar. That specifically hit the part that he cut off. So there couldn't even be Celts here. But instead, to him, Celts and all these peoples here, up to even the Dardani, man. Wow, these people are Pannonians. And also, the whole of the British Islands, or of the British Isles, are completely Celtic. Look at that. Not a single part is not Celtic. Just completely. Just bleeding in Celtic. And Iberia is 0% Celtic. Just 0. 100% Celtic British Isles, 0% Iberia. Beautiful. This one, Celt-Iberia, not Celtic. Only the northwestern part of Iberia. Gaul, fully Celtic. British Isles, fully Celtic. Ireland, fully Celtic. Look at this. Celtic-Berry. It's just all of them, except that it's just like their northern half, northern third. Now Gaul, fully Celtic. Britain, fully Celtic. Scotland, fully Celtic. Ireland, fully Celtic. But Iberia, just a little bit of patch, just a little bit in the north, but we can ignore it. It doesn't matter. Does not matter. The geography of Celtic Scythian commerce. Look at that. Celtic Scythian commerce. Except it doesn't include any of the Celts because, you know, the Celts are in Iberia. So, but it includes all of Gaul, includes a little bit of Britain in this case, because they can't miss out. This guy gets it nicely. Look at that. That's pretty much the proportion of Iberia that was actually Celtic. That's pretty good. There were still areas inside of this Iberian territory. Of course, there were colonies of every nation and other nations. But this is pretty good. It shows their ample domination of the Danube. Shows a lot of. It's a very comprehensive. Even Gallia Cisalpina shows like their largest extent. It's a very, very good, very complete map, I believe. Celtic nations. The Celtic nations. Look at this. Map of Celts in Europe. You gotta be kidding me. Map showing the lands of the Celts. My god. Look at that. Completely missed the Celts. Like, those are literally the Galatians. Or Gallians, as Strabo and Siculus talked about. They specifically said that those people are not Celts. But now they're the Celts. You see the problem? And those people are more Northern Europeans than the Southwestern Europeans that are the Celts. So the label is being given to Northwestern Europeans. To their credit, they do have a slide that includes Iberia, but again, this theory that they start out in this region of the map at the top is only based on misreading of Herodotus. So I think I've made my point here, Metatron, that unfortunately this belief that the Celts are more associated with Central Europe than Iberia continues, and one of the reasons is because unfortunately it's much more readily accessible to come across these outdated sources that we have today still. And when you only go as deep as these ready to eat sources, ready to consume sources that are the most popular, then you end up repeating these things that have already been refuted in academia, and it just makes it take longer for us to correct these mistakes. Currently, academics are even trying to push for a correction of this mistake of applying the label Celts to any Northwestern Europeans. Let's go back to the paper. Unfortunately, all these scholars assumed that Herodotus knew where the source of the Danube lay, something the Romans did not discover until 15 BC, according to Strabo. The focus of both passages in Herodotus is the immeasurable length of the Nile and its alleged symmetry with the Danube, which supposedly flowed through the whole of Europe to the Black Sea, starting from the land of the Celts, the westernmost people of Europe except for the Kennedys, and the city, in quotes, of Pyrene. In the first passage, Herodotus added that the Celts lived beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, something that was certainly true of the Kennedys, who dwelt in the Portuguese Algarve. Herodotus' city, in quotes, of Pyrene, though followed by Avienus, must be a mistake for mountain, i.e., the Pyrenees, as is shown by Aristotle's statement, So in Meteorology 113, 350b, under this work, Aristotle makes the correction. The Pyrenees is a mountain in the west in Celtic, from which the Tartessus River flows westwards to the Atlantic beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and the Danube flows eastwards across Europe to the Black Sea. So Aristotle is telling us that the reason Herodotus was referring to Pyrene, although they are the Pyrenees Mountains, is because they are also a very Western reference for Europe. They are Pyrene is a mountain in the west from which the Tartessian River flows west into the Atlantic beyond the Pillars of Hercules. So it has a famous river. This mountain range has a famous river, again according to the theory, according to the knowledge of the time that was passed down to Aristotle, has a river that then flows into the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules. So that's how Western this was. That's why it was being used as a reference, as a westernmost thing in Europe, with which to use as a reference, which to use as a reference for something that you want to place in a very Western position in Europe. Aristotle obviously overestimated either the length of this Tartessian River or the width of the Pyrenees, or both. The best explanation of their lengthy Danube is that Herodotus and Aristotle imagined it to be connected with the Pyrenean River like the Ariège, or as supposed by Timagetus in the 4th century, and perhaps by Apollonius in the 3rd, with the Rhone, which in turn, according to Aeschylus and other ancient writers, reached Iberia. So everything was to try and position the reference point in Iberia, it being Iberia. That's the whole point of using these references. We deduce then that Herodotus had heard about Celts in and around the Pyrenees, circa 450 BC. The Celts in question may have been specifically the historically attested Celtiberians of northeastern Spain, south of the river Ebro. In placing the Hispanic Celts beyond the Pillars of Hercules, Herodotus may have been influenced by the position of the Kinetes. No, Herodotus was most likely talking about these guys. He was most likely talking about these guys. Even though these are attested at least 300 years after he wrote, or like about 286 years or something like that, it's still likely that these were the people. Or he may have exaggerated the extent of the Hispanic Celts, as later Greek writers did, as when Herodotus of Heraclea, circa 400 BC, assigned all the territory east of the Mastinoi, as far as the Rhone, to the Celcianoi, probably a scribal slip for Celtianoi. Deschelet's much repeated suggestion in 1913 that Herodotus knew about Celts at the true source of the Danube as well as ones in the far west was an unconvincing attempt to shore up the Eastern homeland theory. So Metatron, this is an important point because you're going to see some scholars defend that actually we can hypothesize that he was confused about some two pieces of knowledge that he had about Celts in both places, and that's why we can infer from that sentence that actually there were Celts both in the true source of the Danube and in his hypothesized source of the Danube in Iberia. But again, the passage does not allow us to defend that, to support it. The passage does not support that either, and it again is not making an assertion about the location of the Celts, but of the location of the source of the river Danube. And so because of that, it was an unconvincing attempt to shore up the Eastern homeland theory. So it cannot be used anymore as a valid argument, and it has been refuted by what I have just shown you and read from this paper. Deprived of support from Hecataeus and Herodotus, the Celtic label for the Eastern Hallstatt culture has to depend on Celtic place and personal names. So now we're getting to the third point. The first point was the Nirax equal Noria or Noricum, which ended up equaling Nuragi and Nurak in Sardinia. The second point was this source of the river Danube being attempted to be placed in southern Germany, but rather having to be forcefully located in Iberia. And now this third point about Celtic place and personal names in Central Europe. But these are tested too late to be useful. For example, Artobriga, 50 miles northwest of Hallstatt, is a transparently Celtic place name, Bearfort, and so is Gabromago, Goatfield, 30 miles east of Hallstatt, yet they're only attested in late sources like Ptolemy Circa 150 AD, in the Antonine Itinerary and the Tabula Peutingeriana, which long postdate the Celtic eastward migrations of the 4th and 3rd centuries. We cannot assume that such names are ancient. Both in Austria and eastwards into Hungary, or Pannonia, the Celtic place names seem to form a superstrate above an older layer of toponymy, which Peter Unheiter called the Eastern Alpine Indo-European. If a linguistic label really had to be attached to the Eastern Hallstatt culture, Unheiter's Eastern Alpine Indo-European would be preferable both to Celtic and even more so to Germanic, recently suggested by Renfrew, when rightly questioning whether the Hallstatt chiefs of the Hoineberg in the 6th century BC spoke a Celtic language at all. It has to be remembered that archaeological cultures and languages do not have to coincide. It has also to be remembered that there were probably many more languages around than the familiar ones like Celtic, Germanic, and Italic. According to Prosper, for example, Pannonia forms a part of a vast linguistic continuum in which an indeterminate number of Indo-European dialects was once spoken. So because the Eastern Hallstatt territory spanned much of Pannonia, therefore we cannot conclude that it spoke only one language, even though the Western Hallstatt territory did speak one language, mostly Celtic, seemingly only. We cannot make the same judgment for Eastern Hallstatt. So the whole theory suffers from this from overly associating the cultures with languages, and then assuming that correlation always exists, but in truth it doesn't. And especially with the Hallstatt territory, the place names and personal names cannot guarantee that they spoke Celtic at an earlier age than these eastward movements of the Celts. You see the point that they made, that Sims Williams is making here, is that they are attested too late, those place names and personal names. And so this is also why, this is the third reason that these theories about Hallstatt expansion of the Celts are no longer tenable. Let me see if the rest is important, because it's really just those three parts. I think after this he goes into something else, even though he hasn't cut up the section here. Let me see the density. The density of Celtic-looking place names in the East Alpine region is lower than in Britain or France, and the same is true further east. The sparse but often militaristic nature of these eastern place names suggests relatively late settlement by a Celtic-speaking elite. So actually the Celtic-speaking elite is more in this easternmost territory of the Celts than ever in the West. In the West, as I have shown in other streams, due to the derivation in suffixes and even prefixes, those features suggest to us that those are their original territories. The original territories of those people bearing the names of the Celts. And the way that these other places are named suggests that they were named by this Celtic-speaking elite because they have a militaristic nature. these Eastern place names, whereas in the West they don't, mostly. In contrast to its shortage of Celtic place names, Noricum has far more than its share of Celtic personal names, more for its size than any other part of the Roman Empire. This presumably reflects the relatively privileged status granted to the Noricans who identified as Celtic when the inscriptions were erected in the first 3 centuries AD, rather than the situation 5 or 6 centuries earlier. So this is because they had a privileged position during those late Iron Age years. Subliminally, these impressive inscriptions may have reinforced modern impressions that Noricum and its region were near the Celtic homeland. For that eastern homeland, there is no early evidence, as we have seen. So this is where he ends the topic. Celtic from the east, dear Metatron, resulted from a circular argument by which the classical sources, such as Herodotus, were misread so as to apply the Celtic label to the Hallstatt culture. So as you have seen, this is all a circular argument. They misread Herodotus, they misread, or rather, with Hecataeus and the example of Nyrax, they misassociate Nyrax with Noria and Noricum, and then they exaggerate the age, how ancient these personal and place names are in the East, by even falsifying evidence by changing Taurini to Tauriski. For all those reasons, we can no longer defend this Celtic from the East. This is where he comes to the end of the refutation. There's actually nothing that isn't circular to defend that the Celts came from Central Europe. And I really want to make this point once and for all, because it just gets repeated so often on the internet. And I want to invite you, Metatron, to help us spread more the information that this is the old theory. It can no longer be defended. I hope I have done a good enough treatment here that perhaps even you could take from it. And I hope that I've shown you the exact places where I took this information from, enough that you can, in the near future, produce something that would cover this information to explain to people with your impressive audience that and how much of the public you can reach, that the Celts are no longer associated with Central Europeans in this way. They're no longer associated with Hallstatt in this way, and under this model that it was first the Eastern Hallstatt, and then along the path of civilizational progress from east to west in Europe, so did the Celts migrate from these Eastern Hallstatt territories to Western Hallstatt territories, and then ultimately to Western Europe. That is the old narrative, for which, as we have seen, no longer do we not have evidence. We actually never had it. We were misrepresenting it and falsifying evidence along the way in order to make a point for which we already had preconceived conclusions. So I hope that you understand that, again, I'm just trying to bring this to you in a friendly way, so that you can hopefully help, academics, even not just me, but academics, as Patrick Sims Williams. And again, he's the president, or at least he was until recently, but I'm sure that I am currently under the impression that he is the president of the International Congress of Celtic Studies, and so this is being defended from high up in the Celtic Studies. It's being defended by its leadership, and I hope that you will help us, because I do agree that this is no longer tenable. And as I have shown here and in other streams, these are not the Celts to begin with. That's why now we have this whole Celtoskepticism movement to try and unglue, to try and unpair, try and separate the name of the Celts from these outdated models of Celtic expansion from the east into mainly, as we have seen from the maps, into mainly the British Isles. And so for today, I'm gonna leave it there, but we will definitely pick up from this the Celtic language. That's gonna be the next episode. I'm gonna continue here refuting this rest here, but I think for now I need to go. Actually, maybe we'll continue this and then we'll finish it off right now. Maybe let me go ahead and take a break and then we'll see. All right, let's tackle this. I'm gonna put my headphones on. Let me see what he talks about in regards to this last chapter, and then we'll finish it off right now. So he's showing something like a graph that divides the Celtic languages in Celtic Q and Celtic P, or P Celtic and Q Celtic. I believe that today in academia that is a more superficial division, and I don't think that that's the most prominently defended division. But regardless, this is, these languages were arbitrarily named Celtic, as I have already extensively made that point in another stream, so I'm not going to rehash that entire thing. Okay, so that is really all, and there's nothing more. There's no other point that he makes. He just makes a brief exposition of what the Celtic languages are if you were to split them in P and Q. But again, I have made the point that these languages were called Celtic arbitrarily. They were actually first called Gaelic, and so if we had remained with that label, you would have been trying to convince people that the Irish and the Welsh are a Gaelic people, but then because the languages were named Celtic after the Celtic of Spain, there's now people like Metatron has made on another video, has done rather. There's people who are convinced that the Irish and the Welsh are Celts. But we'll see on another video that speaking of Celts, speaking of Celtic speakers as Celts, started with under Edward Lewid, under his influence with the work that he had published, talking about Celtic speakers, and then people just shortened it as Celts, and so it's only been really since the 18th century, since 1707, that Celtic speakers started being called Celts. But again, this is something that has now stopped, at least for some 15 years now. Now with Celto-skepticism in the helm of Celtic studies, academics no longer will call Gaelic and Brythonic Celtic. They're going to be called insular languages. And then Celtic will be reserved for people who call themselves Celts, which, as we have seen, ultimately are these people and these people. So with that, we finally conclude this the Celts by Metatron series, and it's been very informative, I think, because it helped me to shore up a lot of these pieces of evidence. Eventually, they're going to be organized on a website that will allow for the public to find them really quickly in order to make these points, so that other people can help me make these points to their audiences. For now, though, I will conclude the analysis of Metatron's Celts here on this video. This will be the last for now. We'll talk about Metatron later once he makes more videos about the Celts. I have other people that I need to address their usage of the Celts too. Hopefully, again, tomorrow I'll be able to make another stream. We'll see. But for now, though, this will be all. And thank you very much for watching. And until next time, goodbye.
When you say Celtic, that is according to whom and when.